They'd get a recorded warning, and then they had 3 days to do the next step, and then 7 days after that. Normally it's months to do this. It was predetermined that they were going to be released under what's called a 5F category, which is unsuitable for further service. And now usually that category is reserved for someone with an alcohol or drug problem, a domestic violence person, someone that the forces has worked with but can't rehabilitate, so they need to release them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what my clients were told: you're equivalent to a rapist, a drug addict, an alcoholic. And yet these were outstanding people who had no blemishes on their records.
Wow.
Their records were absolutely perfect. Some had served for over 35 years.
My gut is still upset from hearing claims of emotional and physical abuses that the Canadian heroes in our Canadian Armed Forces who resisted or did not comply with the COVID-19 jab mandate allegedly endured by their chain of command. I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News, and today their attorney, Catherine Christensen, joins me to talk about it. Did you know that hundreds of armed forces members and veterans have joined 2 separate mass lawsuits that bring forth allegations against the CAF for abusing its power, authority, and breaching its members' charter rights when implementing its COVID-19 vaccine mandate that began in October 2021 and, believe it or not, is still in place today? On Thursday, I brought you live updates from a hearing for one of those cases, in which a judge, Catherine Christensen, heard submissions from the CAF's counsel, who brought forth a motion to try and have that case dismissed before it heads to trial. Judge Cohen also heard submissions from the plaintiff's counsel, who argued that the mass tort should proceed. So, who are the plaintiffs in this case? They are 330 of the estimated 10% of forces that were lost due to the mandate. Of the 300 plus whistleblowers, approximately 100 are currently still employed. Another 100 have filed grievances. Around 60 opted to retire since the tyrannical mandate, and around another 60 ultimately did receive the experimental jabs, but are still joining the fight against the alleged abusive vaccine mandate directives. We're still waiting for the judge's decision on the matter, and you can find the live updates from that hearing by clicking on the link to the written article for this report, which is in the description box below. But first, listen to counsel Catherine Christensen, who is representing these military whistleblowers in both cases through a nonprofit which specializes in offering legal help to veterans. It's called Valor Legal Action Center. Christensen joins me now to break down some of the shocking claims of abuse for those who served our country so well.
They were willing to come forward, give sworn evidence. We have over 600,000 pages of evidence of abuses in the Canadian Armed Forces, all connected to this lawsuit. And we were able to obtain a lot of this because these 458 people were there. I do know that for accommodations, people who sought exemptions from the mandate, we have those numbers, and 87% of them were turned down. 87. So to get an accommodation was extremely rare in the Canadian Armed Forces. And part of the reason is the Canadian Armed Forces issued a list of acceptable religion in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Oh, okay.
Now, our Supreme Court of Canada has a very different definition of religion and personal belief. And the Canadian Armed Forces says, no. There's only, I think it's 25 religions that they will recognize. One of the religions that was not on the list was a form of Catholicism. One of the chaplains who was granting accommodations for religious reasons was a Catholic in uniform, and he was punished and told that his faith was not sincere enough.
Oh,
man. It was really ridiculous. Not on the list was certain pagan religions, yet some were given accommodations, a couple of people, and others weren't. So that was the other problem, is that it wasn't consistent. I have a married couple who attend the same church, and one was accommodated and the other wasn't.
Oh my goodness. That is
Two brothers that attend the same church, one was accommodated, one wasn't. The Chief of Defense Staff did not actually issue an order for people to be vaccinated. He had that power under the National Defense Act, Section 126. The Chief of Defense Staff can order everyone in the forces to be vaccinated with whatever vaccination he orders. They didn't do that with the COVID-19 vaccine. Instead, they issued what's called a directive. And to put it in layman's terms, an order is we're going to take that hill.
Mm-hmm.
A directive said this is how we're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So they only issued the directive, and then they attach what's called an aide memoire to this directive. And in it, they were then calling that directive an order.
Mm-hmm.
And that directive was interpreted across the country by commanding officers as an order. And they were told, if you don't get vaccinated, you are not following a lawful or legal order.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in some of their release paperwork, it says, failed to follow a lawful order. But if they didn't follow a lawful order, they have to be charged under the Code of Service Discipline and go to court-martial, mm-hmm. where they can have full evidence, be protected by the laws for equivalent of a criminal trial, and have a chance to present their side. And that was completely removed from their ability to do that under this directive. So this is why it was such a perfect example of the abuses that happen in the Canadian Armed Forces, because it's not just the mandate where this sort of treatment happens.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned to the judge, it also, if they had gone through the process that they ought to have gone through, they could have been getting more accommodations possibly, right?
Agreed. Yes. And more accommodations. They wouldn't have lost so many people. Mm-hmm. They lost between 3,000 and 5,000 people.
Wow.
Because of the mandate. And we don't have that big of a military to lose 3,000 to 5,000 people. And the people that were sort of wiped out were the master corporals, the sergeants, the warrant officers, captains. These are the people that train new recruits. So the Canadian Armed Forces is in an absolute crisis. They don't have enough people, but they don't have they don't have the skills left anymore mm-hmm. to train the people that they would recruit.
What if governments are trying to reinvent the wheel when the greatest teacher of all times has already laid out the perfect blueprint for a constitution for a kingdom of love, faith, and freedom? Introducing the Kingdom of Heaven Freedom Passport. This special edition Freedom Passport captures the foundational truths of love, ethics, and freedom for all. It's a powerful reminder of Jesus' call to love one another and to be part of something bigger that you can carry with you every day. Join the movement, share the truth, and spread the love with your family and friends. Get your Kingdom of Heaven Freedom Passport at freedompassport.ca. And right now, all orders in North America come with free shipping and a free downloadable song with every purchase.
And it's so ironic because one of the plaintiffs was a flight instructor at the Moose Jaw mm-hmm. Base, where he was training pilots for the Royal Canadian Air Force. And he refused the vaccine. He ended up being posted to Winnipeg to sit at a desk. He released from the Canadian Armed Forces, and now is back at Moose Jaw as a contractor, doing the same job he did in uniform.
Oh my goodness.
So, and the pilots, we have a lot of pilots and special forces who mm-hmm. are plaintiffs. Mm-hmm. And our estimates, Canada has lost between $3 to $5 billion in training and experience from the Canadian Armed Forces.
Wow.
To put it in dollar terms, that COVID mandate directive has cost Canada $3 to $5 billion and the ability to defend itself, because we lost 10% of our forces because of it.
And like you said, where is the logic? Now, I want to talk about what had my jaw dropping, and I'm sure many of the viewers as well. And that was what you referred to as the most significant form of abuse of authority. Tell the viewers about that.
So some of the clients, and I have to be honest with you, Drea, this is why I took the case in
Mhm.
2021,
Yeah.
because I started hearing the stories. The most egregious story that has come out of this was a young man who was in Saint Jean, Quebec. His commanding officer, it, and this was during the convoy. If I don't know, people will recall how cold it was.
Yeah.
So the middle of winter in Quebec, his commanding officer forced him to be outside all day, standing outside, and right where all of his coworkers would have to go past him until he would take the vaccine.
Oh,
And he refused the vaccine.
wow.
He had his reasons for not taking it, and he managed to make it for 6 weeks in the bitter cold,
Wow.
not dressed for the cold, but he made it 6 weeks. He lost 30 pounds of muscle mass and mentally couldn't take it anymore. So he voluntarily released. So the statistics don't actually show the reality because he was forced out.
Well,
And I don't know about you, but that's the kid I want in the foxhole with me.
that is the
Uh,
kid we want in the
yeah,
foxhole.
we had pregnant members who had complications, and their obstetrician put them in the hospital, and they were charged with AWOL, absent without leave, a criminal charge in the
No.
military, because they were accused of trying to avoid the vaccine.
Wow.
Some of our pregnant women were having guys in uniform show up on their doorstep with paperwork, banging on the door, and they're not supposed to do this. This is not following policy. And one young chaplain called me, and he said, "There's been in uniform on my doorstep demanding I sign papers. What do I
Wow.
do?" And I could hear his newborn baby in the background. He had just gone on paternity leave. And I said, "You're going to keep talking to me till they leave." because,
Jeez.
because in my Canada, men in uniform don't show up and demand anything
I
from
know.
somebody on the doorstep, even if you do swear an oath to the king and put on a uniform.
Oh
So,
my goodness.
and then I had a young woman in the Navy on the West Coast. She had just come back from a stress leave. They emptied the wardroom, set everybody home, put her in a room with 4 senior male officers, and refused to let her leave until she'd sign a piece of paper that says she would not follow a lawful order.
This is so shocking and disturbing. And the level of dehumanizing that had to take place across our country for this to be acceptable for our heroes is so disturbing. Tell us about these hearsay hearings that would pop up. My understanding is that it would be people who had a little bit more power, and when they weren't playing along with the COVID policy, what was happening to them?
So they were being drawn into what's an administrative process that the Canadian Armed Forces really likes this administrative process because it has no judicial scrutiny.
Mm.
They can't be called into the court on these administrative reviews.
Mm.
So they would say no, they wouldn't attest. If they didn't attest into what was called Monitor Mass, which is a public portal, then sometimes their chain of command would put something in for them,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was accurate or not. And then they would be called in for what's called a recorded warning. And that recorded warning there's a timetable that's supposed to be followed that was completely forgotten with the COVID mandate. They get a recorded warning, and then they had 3 days to do the next step, and then 7 days after that. Normally it's months to do this. And it was predetermined that they were going to be released under what's called a 5F category, which is unsuitable for further service. And now, usually that category is reserved for someone with an alcohol or drug problem, a domestic violence person, someone that the forces has worked with but can't rehabilitate, so they need to release them.
Hmm.
And this is what my clients were told: you're equivalent to a rapist, a drug addict, an alcoholic. And yet these were outstanding people who had no blemishes on their records.
Wow.
Their records were absolutely perfect. Some had served for over 35 years
Now,
without a single step wrong, and now they were being told that they were these terrible people, and no due process at all.
I'm just
Some
gonna,
people were released within 2 weeks. They were gone.
and none of them had any charges in the end, or they weren't
None.
found guilty, I should say.
And also, senior level officers, generals and admirals, were all being removed under allegations of sexual misconduct, which none of them have been convicted for,
Wow.
uh, because they wouldn't agree with the COVID mandate. They said no,
So
and
you're
we
saying,
have paperwork to back them up.
hold on here. So you're saying that um, they would say, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to force anybody to get this. And then how long from that point to, oh my gosh, I'm being accused of sexual misconduct?
Within weeks to just a few months,
And was
where they
this,
said, no, we are not going to do this. We cannot do this under Canadian law and under our own policies. We can't force people to take this vaccine. And very conveniently, the Canadian Armed Forces then accused them of historical sexual assaults or etc. And they've all been cleared, and not one of them has been convicted of it.
historical sexual assaults? What do you mean by that?
So some of the accusations that were leveled against some of these generals went back to their time at the Royal Military College. So some were over 30 years. Just this week, Admiral Edmondson was cleared of an allegation of sexual assault on a ship in the 1990s.
Now, you took on this massive legal action through a nonprofit called Valor Legal Action Center. People can get to know more about that or even contribute to the cost. We'll have that linked in the written article for this report. But why don't you end on what is next with the fight? What can we expect? I know we're waiting for the judge's answer, and that might take a little bit of a while, but if we're in trial, how long would that take before maybe some justice is served?
Well, it's very interesting because historically, when the Crown loses a motion to dismiss on such a large lawsuit with Canadian Armed Forces, such as the sexual assault one and the racial discrimination one, they quite often will settle at
Mm,
that point. So if that happens, then it could be over in a year or so,
wow.
around a year. If they decide that they want to keep fighting this and have a lot of revelations come out, then we go into what's called a discovery. We do depositions, and I will be calling those generals and admirals that were pushed out as witnesses.
Yeah.
And then once that's done for both sides, we then move on to trial. So we could be, given we've got 330 and 128, we could be at this for a while.
Wow. Well, Rebel News will be following it closely. Thank you for taking the time to fill everybody in.
Thank you for having us, and we're I'm really proud to take care of have all these 450. I've got a battalion of fantastic people that I'm representing, and I'm very proud of them.
If this report wasn't already shocking enough, wait until you see my next report, which shows that the actual order for this vaccine mandate may in itself have been unlawful. And you're not going to want to miss who it looks like that order was handed down from. If you haven't already done so, please take a second to go to our special website called nomoreshots.ca. Sign and share our petition there demanding that these coercively rolled out COVID-19 vaccine jabs be pulled off the market until they are actually proven to be safe and effective as much as they've been proclaimed.